As a Chinese teacher, you often get asked, do fonts matter when studying Chinese characters? Now, the simple answer is yes, and there's actually a very interesting story as to why that is. First, let's talk a little bit about modern Chinese characters. One could say that all the characters that we write today are a form of kai shu. If you look at the evolution of Chinese characters, kai shu was approximately formed 2,000 years ago. And the reason that we still use characters that were written 2,000 years ago is when it got to this phase of evolution, the characters were clear to write, clear to see. Kai shu could be the kai mo of Chinese characters. Kai mo means something that's worth emulating or learning from, or put simply, something that's worth copying from. And that's why kai shu is the font that's worth learning from. It's the font that Skritter uses, it's the font that most textbooks use, and it's the font that most educators would recommend. However, even though one could argue that all modern Chinese fonts are a variation of kai shu, as a learner, we often encounter different types of font that do cause a bit of confusion as to how do I actually write this character, and we'll go into some examples. The two fonts that we're going to talk about are 细明体 and 楷体. So 楷体 of 楷书. 细明体 is something that you'll often find as a default font on most computer software. I actually didn't know this before researching this video, but 细明体 was originally developed as a printing font. So this was the font that they had to carve Chinese characters onto blocks. Now, if you're printing blocks day in, day out, if you're dealing with ink, you need a font that A, is easy to carve, where the tiny little cubes in betweens don't break off, and that you don't get too much ink smudge. And after hearing this history of 细明体, the font makes a lot more sense to me, and I see why there is this variation. Now, even though 楷体 or 楷书 should be the default font for everyone, especially when it comes to writing, because 细明体 was so widespread, you would see it in newspapers, books, that obviously people started writing like it. And that's why when you see certain characters, you go, why does one person write it like this and the other like that? Let's look at the character 清. Do you notice the moon radical underneath? In 细明体, there's a line that goes down instead of two strokes that go across. The 楷体 one is actually the correct one. By designing it like this, it made the block much more durable. But guys, if you're writing it, you should write it like 楷体 represents it. Now let's look at another character where the printing issue is very, very clear. 既然的既. If you look at the left side of ji, this little dot was really hard to maintain, and that's why they changed it into this. That pragmatic concern for printing is evident in these two characters also. 为什么的为 and the radical 是. Tiny dots would often disappear during wear and tear, so a lot of these small dots have been replaced by long strokes. Now, of course, 细明体 is not the only font that printers used to use. Another popular one is called 宋体. The reason that it's called 宋体 is because, yes, it was developed in the Song dynasty. As far back as the Song or Ming dynasty, China had established printing press, and I think that's pretty impressive. Now, of course, nowadays we have computers and the sky's the limit with fonts, but back then they were very practical concerns, and that's why the characters are the way that they are as we see today. An interesting thing about the printing press in the Song or the Ming dynasty is that they were carving into wood. And in order to work with or along with the grain in the wood, you'll find that a lot of these older fonts from the Song or Ming dynasty are thicker when it's vertical and thinner when it's horizontal. Just to clarify, there was a standardized practice of making the wood grain horizontal. So of course, right, if you're carving downwards, it needs to be thicker to be more clear. And if you're carving horizontally, you're kind of going with the grain, so it makes it a bit easier to carve. Going back to the printing press, things quickly moved on from wood to harder materials such as lead. And that's when we see the development of fonts such as 明体 黑体、仿宋体, and 楷体. These 4 fonts then became the main fonts for printing. I hope you found this video useful. I know I did, and researching it, I found out things that I didn't know about certain fonts. It's made writing characters less confusing for me because now that I know that there was a pragmatic concern for designing a font like that as a learner, I should probably stick with 楷书. Now, we've obviously only scratched the surface for Chinese characters. There's lots more history into calligraphy, different styles, different schools of thought in calligraphy, all of which we'll cover in future videos. So going back to our original question, do fonts matter when studying Chinese? The answer is yes, especially for writing. One should try to learn from and copy off 楷体. But when encountering different people writing differently, you shouldn't panic because it's probably a legacy or a result of the evolution of the Chinese printing press. So you're always going to encounter variations both in general in your Chinese learning journey, right? You're going to encounter different pronunciations, you're going to encounter different ways to write. But there's always kind of a main guideline to follow, and specifically for writing, that's 楷书,楷体. If you like this video, support us by subscribing to a free trial at skritter.com.